Who are the most overrated teams heading into the 2022 season? And let me just take a minute here and tell you kind of the criteria I'm looking at, or the qualifications I'm kind of using to base this on. If you go back to last offseason, there was specifically 3 teams that were in almost every single preseason top 10 poll you looked at, or ranking you looked at, no matter who put it out or who did it, that did not finish in the top 10 and had disappointing seasons compared to really disappointing seasons compared to preseason expectations by the majority of people. Clemson, Iowa State, and North Carolina. All 3 of those teams were in everybody's top 10. Clemson was top 4, top 3, top 2 even in a lot of preseason rankings last year. Iowa State and North Carolina were both in the 6 to 10 range in almost every single preseason poll and ranking you looked at last year. All 3 extremely disappointing. What are some teams this year that are ranked very high, top 10-ish, top 15-ish, in just about every single poll or ranking you look at, that you think aren't going to finish in the top 10? We're not talking about, winning a national title or whatever, but aren't even going to finish in the top 10. Now, I wanted to find a specific poll to use, just so I would have something to go off of. I didn't want to use like any ESPN ranking because there's too many people that hate ESPN and their bias and all that crap. I didn't want to use Fox Sports for the same reason. So I found a CBS Sports ranking, a CBS Sports post-spring updated top 25. And I'll probably get some people in here now that'll say they hate CBS. But so don't really pay attention to the exact preseason ranking of these teams I'm going to talk about, but just ask yourself, of all the rankings and polls and everything you've looked at so far in the offseason, these 3 teams or 4 teams that I'm going to talk about today are in almost every single top 10, and at a minimum they're in every single top 15. And I think these are the 4 teams most likely not to finish in the top 10 based on preseason rankings and expectations, right? Very highly ranked teams. We're going to start out number 1, Oklahoma. Now, in the CBS poll that I used, they're ranked 4th. 4th. You rank somebody 4th in a preseason or off-season poll, you're basically calling them a playoff caliber team. Maybe they won't make the playoffs, but you're saying they're very close. I don't see it with Oklahoma this year. Last year was the first year in forever Oklahoma didn't win the Big 12, didn't even come close to making the playoffs. Now, they only had 2 losses, but if you've watched Oklahoma play the last 4, 5, 6 years, last year's version of Oklahoma was clearly the worst version we've seen in a long time. So you have to ask yourself this: have the changes that have been made at Oklahoma from last season to this season, it really going to improve them this year? Let's start with head coach. Now, all of a sudden, every Oklahoma fan I talk to on the face of the earth thinks Lincoln Riley's a horrible head coach. He's terrible. He's not any good. He was lucky to ever win a single game. This is strange to me. I know Lincoln Riley flopped in the playoffs, right? I know Lincoln Riley neglected the defense and people got tired of that. I get that. He was not a perfect coach. But the guy won the conference how many years in a row? Made the playoffs how many years in a row? Beat Texas how many years in a row? I mean, the guy did a lot of good things at Oklahoma. And he is still today one of the smartest and brightest offensive minds in all of modern college football, period. I mean, he's up there with whoever you want to name: Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian, but on down whoever you think the best offensive minds are. He's right up there. You lose him and you bring in Brent Venables. I'm not telling you Brent Venables is going to be a terrible coach. I'm telling you there's no way to know. The guy's never coached a game. I said the same thing when Georgia hired Kirby Smart. I've said the same thing when any other team has hired a coach that's never been a coach before. Manny Diaz with Miami. On and on and on and on. You just don't know. But forget the whole change at coach thing. You lost not only your starting quarterback, but you lost your Heisman contending starting quarterback. You also lost your backup quarterback, who was top 3 in the Heisman odds heading into last season. You lost your top 2 quarterbacks. Your head coach, who's also your play caller. You lost wide receivers off of last year's team, both to graduation, the draft, as well as the transfer portal. Hasselwood left, the tight end left. So You bring Venables in, who's a defensive genius. There's no doubt about it. You want to talk about Lincoln Riley being one of the best offensive minds? Brent Venables is one of the best defensive minds. Hands down, period. No question about it. But here's the problem. Go back and look at Oklahoma's recruiting classes over the last 5 to 6 years under Lincoln Riley. Yeah, top 5, top 10 classes. Almost all of Oklahoma's top 7, 8 recruits every single year are offensive guys. We all know there's no talent on the Oklahoma defense. Oklahoma fans knew it last year and the year before, the year before. All of a sudden now they have Brent Venables, and it's like the Oklahoma fans think the talent is there. It's not. So I don't think Oklahoma's defense is going to be able to take enough of a step forward in year one under Brent Venables with not much defensive talent and definitely no defensive depth to make up for the step backwards they're guaranteed to take offensively. I know you brought in Dylan Gabriel, right? The quarterback from Central Florida. And you brought in his coach from Central Florida to call the plays at Oklahoma, which is a smart move. And I think Dylan Gabriel will have a good season. He's not Caleb Williams. He's not even Spencer Rattler, as much as you don't want to admit that. He's not. I don't understand how anyone thinks Oklahoma is a top 5 team heading into next year. I don't see it. Oh, you just hate Oklahoma. Why? Why would I hate Oklahoma? Why? There's no reason. We whipped Oklahoma the last time we played them in a playoff game. We won a national title last year while Oklahoma sat home and watched. What reason would I have to hate Oklahoma? I don't hate Oklahoma. And I don't think Oklahoma's going to be terrible this year. But Oklahoma State, Baylor, both have a ton coming back. That's who played in the Big 12 title game last year, right? Texas is sitting there with a ton of talent yet to put it together. We'll see if they do it this year. But you look at the schedule for Oklahoma and ask yourself if after the end of this, they're going to be ranked in the top 10 at the end of the season. At Nebraska early in the year. Laugh if you want to. Lord knows I've made plenty of fun of Nebraska. They almost beat Oklahoma last year, okay? And then Texas, of course, was a great game last year. Texas could win that game. On the road at Iowa State, Baylor. You have to play Oklahoma State at the end of the year. You play on the road at West Virginia. West Virginia is not a great team, but it's a difficult road environment. No, West Virginia's never beat Oklahoma, so you probably beat them again. But I don't see. Can Oklahoma go 10-2? I mean, if they go 10-2, with that schedule, borderline top 10 team, in my opinion, at the end of the year. I think Oklahoma is overrated. Tell me down below if you think I'm wrong. Who else? Texas A&M at 7. 7. Now, this is something we see in the preseason with Texas A&M all too often, in my opinion. And outside of the COVID year in 2020, when Texas A&M went 9-1, they lose 4 games every single year. Every single year. And one of the things they'll tell you is, well, we play in a tough division. Well, guess what? You still play in that division. You still play. I think too much hype is being put on Texas A&M's recruiting class that they signed, the freshman class for this coming year. Even if you sign 25 5-stars, how many of those guys are going to have significant impacts in year one? A handful, maybe. And that's the case with Texas A&M. Here we are, a month after spring practices have ended. Texas A&M still doesn't know who their starting quarterback is going to be for this year. They got Haynes King back, who was their starter at the beginning of the year last year before he got hurt, and they brought in a dozen transfers. The quarterback situation is a mess. They have really relied on their defense the last couple of years in the SEC. They had the best defense in the SEC 2 years ago when they went 9-1. They had probably the second best defense in the SEC last year. Still managed to lose 4 games. A good chunk of that defense is gone. I think they're going to have to rely more on their offense this year than they have the last couple of years. And if one of those quarterbacks ends up being really, really good, Texas A&M could finish in the top 10. But that's a big if. That's a big if in my opinion. And you don't even really need to know exactly what the Texas A&M schedule is to know it's going to be a difficult schedule. But here you go. They host Miami early in the year, which is a team I'm high on. I think Miami could have a pretty good year this year. They don't have no quarterback issues. Tyler Van Dyke could come into Texas A&M and light y'all up. I don't know. We'll see. But then listen to God Almighty. You know what? I'm going to take these off because this is. I want you to think I'm serious here right now. People are typing. Oh my God! Put them back on. Listen to this, okay? You play Arkansas at home, or it's a neutral site game. The next week at Mississippi State, and the next week at Bama. In fact, you play Miami the week before that. So 4 games in a row. Miami, Arkansas, at Mississippi State, at Bama. There are a lot of top 10 teams who would lose 2 of those 4. That's a difficult stretch of games to start your season. Even if you go with Haynes King, the guy started how many games in his career? 1? I don't know. This looks like a rough start to the season for Texas A&M. What about the back end of the season? On the road at South Carolina. Well, you've beat them every single year since joining the SEC, and you probably will again, but that's not an easy place to play. Home against Ole Miss, home against Florida, on the road at Auburn, home against LSU. Does that look like a 10-2 schedule for Texas A&M? It doesn't to me. It doesn't to me. This CBS Sports poll that I'm using had Texas A&M ranked 7. 7. And when you read the reasons why, a lot of it has to do with the signing class. I don't get it. All right, let me put these back on so y'all can quit being triggered in the comments. But the real reason I took them off is because I was having a hard time reading my copious notes through these ridiculous glasses that I love to wear. Guess who CBS had ranked 8th? Notre Dame. Notre Dame. Notre Dame's a good team. Notre Dame's a good team. But like Oklahoma, they've got a coach who's never coached a game before. Well, he coached the bowl game last year against Utah. Against, who'd they play? Was it Oklahoma State? Notre Dame had a huge lead at halftime. How'd that work out for that new head coach they have? Well, they came out in the second half and crapped to bed and lost, which is what Notre Dame does in major bowl games going back the last 32 years, so it really shouldn't have been a surprise. But let's talk about Notre Dame's schedule. Now, this is something I've talked about a lot in the offseason. People tend to bash on Notre Dame about their schedule every year. Some years, maybe that's warranted. I don't know about this year, though. First week of the season on the road at Ohio State, that's a loss. So you're not even going to be in the top 10 in week 2 of the season. Never mind the top 10 at the end of the season. Why they have you at 8 here, I don't know. On the road at UNC. Another team that I think people are sleeping on in the ACC, Miami and UNC. Miami and UNC are both going to be better than they were last year. I know North Carolina lost Sam Howell. I don't care. North Carolina's going to be better this year than they were last year. You could lose that game. Not saying you will. You're not going to lose all these games I'm mentioning, but the point is I think you're going to lose enough of them to where you won't be in the top 10 on the road at North Carolina. What about home against BYU? Well, you'll beat BYU. The Mormons versus the Catholics. Now, that's the real holy war there. What about home against Clemson? 100% Notre Dame could lose that game. And then you finish things up on the road at Southern Cal, who I think will be one of the most improved teams in America from last year to this year. Thanks in the most part to a coach that Oklahoma fans think isn't any good, Lincoln Riley, and some of the work he's done in the transfer portal. So there you go. That's Notre Dame at 8. Now, at number 9, or is it? No, number 10. Number 10 in the CBS poll, they have Arkansas. Well, let me say something about, because this is the third SEC or second SEC. Texas A&M and Arkansas are both really good. Every team I'm talking about today is a really good team. I'm just talking about teams that are in the top 10, and I don't think they're going to finish there because either they're a little bit overhyped or their schedule is just so brutal. I don't think they can reach the end of the season with a good enough record to be in the top 10. Doesn't mean I think any of these teams are bad, and this is the case with Arkansas. I don't think Arkansas is a bad team. But just, can they finish 10th? I'm going to take these off again. Can they finish 10th? Well, you tell me, okay? They play Cincinnati and South Carolina in back-to-back weeks at the beginning of the season. Back-to-back weeks. Can they go 2-0 there? They could. I think 1-0 is more, or 1-1 is more likely, though. Okay, after that, who do they play? Texas A&M, Bama, at Mississippi State, at BYU, and that's 4 weeks in a row. No bye weeks, no cupcakes in between. Let me say that again. Home against Texas A&M, home against Bama, on the road at Mississippi State, and on the road at BYU. They could lose all 4 of those games. That doesn't mean they will. And I'm not saying they will, but they 100% could. All 4 of those teams are capable of beating Arkansas, Texas A&M, Bama, Mississippi State, BYU. They closed the season out on the road at Auburn, home against LSU, or that might be a neutral game, home against Ole Miss. I don't know. In fact, of all these teams, Arkansas is probably the least likely to finish in the top 10. Least likely. So there's 4 teams in the CBS Sports top 10 preseason rankings that I have a hard time imagining are going to finish the season in the top 10. I'm curious what y'all think. You can let me know what you think about the 4 teams I mentioned. Am I wrong on any of them? Which of those 4 teams do you think is going to finish in the top 10, if any of them, right? And then give me some other teams that you've seen ranked in the top 10 that you don't think will finish in the top 10. They have Alabama, Ohio State, and Georgia 1, 2, and 3. I think all 3 of those teams will finish in the top 10. But maybe there's some of you out there who think one of those top 3 teams won't finish in the top 10. I think all 3 will. Bama, Ohio State, and Georgia. But anyway, there you go. Uncle Lou's most overrated teams of the offseason so far heading into 2022. Let me know what you think. Have a good morning.